Hello and welcome to the Education on Fire show. Delighted to be back with you. If you're watching live, thank you so much indeed. Remember, if you want to say anything, you want to ask anything, you want to put any comments in the chat, please do. We can bring those on during the show or towards the end of the show even, and we can ask Ashton any questions or kind of have some interaction. Feel free to do that at any point, and then I can control bringing those in as in when. I think there might be a small technical issue with my voice compared to the picture, but we wanted to make sure we came on and stayed live at the right time. So just in case that is the case for you, don't worry, we are aware of it and sort of working from it our end. So if you haven't already, please do subscribe and also hit that notification bell. As I mentioned before, I'm going to probably do one or two sort of Christmassy pop-up kind of sessions. So if you've got that notifications on, then you'll know exactly when that's going to happen, and you can just jump on and we might have a little bit of fun just as we head towards the Christmas period and everything. So if you haven't already subscribed or followed on the audio podcast, if you go to educationonfire.com/listen, takes you to this page and it gives you those direct links to all those different platforms. So whatever your favorite way of listening to podcasts, and especially Education on Fire, that's the place to go to make sure you have all of that information. And speaking about the podcast in terms of this week, we were talking about raising financially responsible children, and Kevin gave us some great advice and also gave us some sort of insights into sort of how his financial background is then taking him through to want to make sure that, because the financial learning doesn't really happen in school in that same kind of way, he wanted to do that certainly for his children and his grandchildren. He thinks it's such an important thing, and so he sort of was sharing his story, the membership he sort of put together, in the way that he's sort of bringing a community together to support each other, to actually sort of make this a way of people being able to learn this, be great mentors as adults, and be able to share that with the children. And you can see here, they've also very kindly given some freebies away. If you go to this particular link as a podcast listener, you will be able to sign up and get those things. So that's wealthbuilders.co.uk/education on fire will take you there. Just go and have a look, and if it's something you think is going to be supportive for you, as I said, they're absolutely free. I think you just have to put your email in to get those details, and then they'll give you everything you need to find out even more information. I suggest you go and listen to the podcast first, and that will give you a really sort of great idea of what Kevin's all about and what he's trying to do there with Wealth Builders. So let's bring Ashton on, and she can tell us about her creativity. Drawing is something, and graphics is something I'm not very good at, so I'm really excited about being able to find out her background and how she sort of got this together and how she's able to then use it to help so many other people. So Ashton, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate your time today.
I am so happy to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me, Mark.
So tell us, first of all, the accent will give it away that you're not just down the road from me. We're a little bit of a distance. So yeah, where are you set up to? And I know you've had some kind of situation in residence issues during today.
Yeah, so I am in Eastern Canada and in the woods in the middle of kind of nowhere in Nova Scotia. And I was just telling Mark before we hopped on that I currently don't have power, but I'm still tuning in. So hopefully all goes well. So if I disappear, that is what is happening. But we've got the generator going and everything, so we should be all good. So fingers crossed that it will all's going to be great.
Fantastic. And as we said before, live is live, and that's what I love. It's, we have the chance to interact with people. If they're watching live, they can ask questions as well, but the only way we can do that is to be live. So I really appreciate you taking all that extra effort to make sure that we can continue today. It'd be fantastic. So give us a little bit of your background. How did this sort of come about, and what is it that you sort of produced for people?
Yeah, so I kind of learned about this world of visual thinking, visual communication, doodling as like a thinking tool as a facilitator. So I was working at a nonprofit in my early 20s as a facilitator and working with like small groups of people, trying to like help them move through to decisions or different goals and stuff that they were working through. And I really fell in love with the concept of facilitation and how you don't have to have all the answers. I think that's my favorite part.
Yeah,
and how you can like ask the right questions, hear what people are saying, listen to it, and feedback in words, kind of that wisdom, right? So it's really about being able for them, giving them a space to be able to hear themselves and connect to others who are in a similar situation or goal or process or what have you. And after doing that for a number of years, I was just kind of like looking around for different opportunities, like kind of within that field. But living so rurally definitely was a bit of a challenge. And I had a friend of mine who told me about a 1 day workshop around graphic facilitation. And I'd never seen it done before. I didn't know anything about it, but I signed up for this 1 day course with him and totally fell in love. And that was 10 years ago.
Wow.
And after sort of playing around for those first few years, I decided that I would create a business around it because I really wanted to do it all the time, all the time.
Yeah.
So yeah, and it's pretty wild to think that was 10 years ago now that I've been doing this. Yeah.
And so let's take a look at some of the things which you've that you produce, or some of the things that you sort of work from, and how we sort of go from there. So should we sort of start at this end? I think AI is obviously something which is really kind of on people's minds at the moment. We're hearing it all over social media. So take us through, obviously, that graphic and sort of how that works from your point of view in producing that sort of thing.
Yeah, so I find myself in really interesting and unique situations. So a lot of meetings, like this one here was a webinar, in person, virtual settings, conferences, strategic planning sessions, like basically where people are either presenting information or people are having a conversation about something. I'm there to kind of help that conversation or that information come to life through a visual. So I think this one here as an example was like an hour-and-a-half webinar, and there was a bit of a presentation at the top, and then there was actually conversations at the bottom. They were breakout sessions, and so I hopped in and out of a couple and actually got some notes afterwards to sort of like fill it all out. But they were talking about some challenges and some strategies around this particular group was around workforce development. So how can they be supporting people who are coming into their organizations and looking for work, and how can they upskill them, and what role does AI play in that, right? So so I find myself in really diverse, interesting types of settings, in terms of topics. Like I've named a topic and I've probably covered at this point. But AI is definitely one that is coming up more and more in the last year, for sure, for me.
So this is something that you're producing during the presentation in the webinar as it's going on, and then
Yeah.
you're able to share it afterwards, or people are able to see it as you're creating it. How does it work from that point?
Yeah, both of those things, kind of depending on the need or desire for that meeting. So for this one, for example, it was in a Zoom call. So instead of seeing like my little face here, you actually see the white screen and the drawings unfold in real time. And this one was a little bit unique because they had breakout sessions. It was finished a little bit after the session too, but the majority of situations I find myself in, it's like 100% live in real time. So when the session is over, I'm done and the graphic is presented, and people, if the client wants people to see it throughout, then we do that. It's really a nice value add so that people can be along for the journey of it. And when they're hearing something, they look at what I'm drawing and it's confirming for them what they've heard or how they can connect to it personally. So the live aspect of it is pretty kind of important from like a learning perspective.
And I think for me, seeing what my notebook looks like when I'm on something like that, which makes all the sense in the world when I'm kind of writing it down at the time, and then it's just random and you look back and you can't remember what it was related to. This is just fantastic because you can sort of see the journey and the story, and it's yeah, I don't have the visual elements in my head to begin with to start like that. So, is this skill set something you always had, or have you sort of developed? Oh, it must have developed as you've been doing more of it. But in terms of that sort of passion for, being able to create it in this way.
Yeah, so I've always been very creative. Name an art medium, and I've probably tried it at least once. I'm kind of like a bit of a jack of all trades, master of none when it comes to different art things. I never really stuck with anything long enough to get like really good at it, maybe other than like learning some instruments. And but I didn't actually draw a whole lot before I started getting into this type of work. I came into it more from a listening, a thinking, a synthesization of information, more of that like putting my like listening and communication hat on that I had developed as a facilitator. So it was actually more about I had to really like learn drawing skills,
Mhm.
which I was really shy to share that my first years, because I thought, well, if people hear that I'm not a professional artist, they might not take me seriously. But now that I'm more in this space currently where I'm teaching people how to do this for their own learning, I've been able to kind of really lean in on my lack of art skills, or drawing skills, learning how to do this, because really you do not have to have any prerequisites. You don't have to know how to draw to be able to start doing something like this.
Got you.
I what I should have done was shared some of my first works with you that you could have shared.
And you can
Should have
see
done
that
that. And
progression.
then
Yeah,
you can
absolutely.
see like then you can see the progression of like some of those works from my early years, and now something like the one that you just shared,
Yeah,
that's a more recent one,
yeah,
right? So I didn't like, come out the bat just drawing these like very clean designs. They were the first few years were a lot of trial and error, a lot of drawing stuff over and over and over again until you build the muscle memory, right? So you're not you when you hear something, already know what to draw,
yeah,
right? So
yeah,
it's really about language learning, right? So where you learn a spoken language, this is a visual language, so you can translate, transcribe in real time, and you have drawings that you already know how to draw. And I think that's like the thing that people don't realize is like, I haven't drawn that. Usually it's not the first time I've ever drawn that something before, right? I
yeah.
already know how to draw it, or a different, or, maybe I've drawn it in a whole bunch of different ways and I present it in a different way when I'm doing it live. But it's like, I've drawn these things before, right?
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense because it's the sort of thing I notice myself doing. There are certain phrases that I use when I'm interviewing people. There are certain stories or certain muscle memories of things that you've done which you kind of lean on and give you that opportunity to kind of feel secure. Like you say, it's not, most things aren't coming completely left field. They've come from somewhere within
Mhm.
that, like I say, that experience which gets more natural the more that you do it. So take us into
So
sort of sketch noting then, and these couple of graphics here.
yeah, so I guess I kind of threw out a couple words already, like graphic facilitation, visual thinking, visual communication, live illustration. There's all these like different words that we kind of use in a professional setting. But sketchnoting was actually a term that was coined about 10 years ago by a guy named Mike Rohde, and he wrote the Sketchnote Handbook. And it's a great book, but it really kind of like helped project this notion that a lot of us use as professionals into more of like personal note taking. So I spent the last year and a half putting together the beginner's guide to sketchnoting, because what I was finding is a lot of people would say, oh, well, I don't know how to draw, but I would love to learn how to do this. And based on like what I just said, or like I didn't have a lot of drawing skills getting into this, went back to kind of the beginner mindset of like, what do people need to know? What have I learned in the last 10 years of doing this professionally that people can be able to put pen to paper or put stylus to iPad to be able to kind of draw their thinking or their communication or what they're learning? Because like I don't feel like I'm that special. Like, yes, I was creative when getting into this. Yes, I was like, I had a lot of like listening and thinking skills going into this, but like, I am not the best artist in the world. And I think people look at it and they go, oh, that's art. And it has artistic elements to it for sure. And of course, it has to look nice when I'm doing it for clients, or I probably wouldn't get hired very much. But if you learn this for yourself, it does not have to be complicated. And I really wanted to create a guide. I put together this book that it was like really hand holding people through the process. So by the end of the book, they're like, yeah, I can totally do this. And because nonfiction drives me a little nutty, because a lot of them are just idea books. And I really didn't want to put together an idea book. I really wanted to make it as practical as possible. Um, so yeah, this I released this book a few months back, and it's very exciting to kind of get it out into the world of just to try to help people uh, know that they can do it for themselves and experience all the amazing benefit and value of
Yeah.
drawing your own thinking. Yeah.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And in terms of sort of the education space, do you sort of find that there are teachers or I don't know, students of
Mm.
any age that kind of have that sense of, I can see where this would really help me, and it wasn't something I've come across before in terms of helping that memory, or sort of like, say, taking notes during a course of some description.
Yeah, so yeah, there's the thing that I'm trying to currently do is work with teachers in schools that are introducing sketchnoting while they're learning note taking. So for here where I am, my daughter is in grade 5. So I just, now that she's in grade 5, I have finally found out that that's where they're learning note taking skills. So I was like, okay, they really should be introduced to it at an early age. It's just like an option. Like, not all kids are going to want to do it, but it would be a beautiful option. Whereas I've been invited to schools to teach older grades, and it's still really great. And there's definitely a handful of kids that really resonate with it. The problem being is they've already learned note taking skills. So it's like now you have to like relearn a new way to do it. And if the kids are like, I don't want to do this, then, it's a little bit harder. So I find a lot of people who are wanting to learn from me now are like professionals, right? So they're like, they work in an IT company and they have to communicate complex ideas, and how can they do that, right? So I'm like attracting a lot of those people. But the school setting seems to be the trickiest space for me currently. This is why I was like so excited to talk to you today, because I think like I just encounter the same comments over and over again of like, oh, I wish I would have learned how to do this when I was younger. This would have been so helpful for me. Um, and some people might have been doing an aspect of it, but they would like get in trouble for doodling, right? And like doodling in its own right will help you remember up to like 29% more information, right? So it's just about like taking those doodles and making them work for you when you're
Yeah.
doing sketchnoting, right? So it's funny that like, and I'm seeing this with my own kids where they do a lot of drawing those first few years of school, and then they just, it seems like overnight, like one grade to the next, they'd like just completely switch, and they're like, no more drawings, words for everything. And I think
Exactly.
we're
I'm
just
grown up
doing,
now. I need to do it a certain way,
yeah,
and yeah,
serious, have to do serious work, right? So
yeah,
I find that we're doing students such a huge disservice by completely switching it and making them focus on words only. And I think lots of students like this kind of thing. Um, it doesn't have to just be for neurodiverse students, but it definitely can be a nice addition, right? So students that have ADHD. I have a teacher friend in the US that worked with a student who has dysgraphia, who really like improved their handwriting by being able to draw things as well, right? So I think it has some really wonderful applications for students who may not fit like a typical mold for a classroom too, right? Being able to give them permission and skills to be able to draw things, right? And elevate their learning. And the example I always give is, let's say you're a teacher and you're peering over like two students' shoulders. One is just doing words and one is doing sketchnoting, where you see words, you see images and drawings and little arrows connecting information. If you're that teacher, which one can you see the learning? Right? You can't see the learning for just the words, but you can see with your own eyes the learning, right? And maybe there's gaps. Be like, oh, you forgot this really important part, right? Where you wouldn't be able to tell that from just word note taking. So
yeah.
yeah, I think we're doing it. That's my TED talk. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, yeah, I love it. And also the thing that always makes me really sort of excited about this sort of thing is the fact that we are all different. So,
Yeah.
like you said, if you start these conversations early enough, like I say, there's going to be a proportion of any given group of people who are like, I love the words, I just need to write it down, I do it in this certain way. I love like I say, the doodling idea. I love the artistic side. I love the fact that we're able to do a myriad of different ways, as long as we're actually learning in a way that suits us, because then all of a sudden you've got ownership of it, which means that you know how to learn best for yourself. It's not that you're debunking everything else. You just realize that I can do A, B, C, and D, and actually C works really well for me, which happens to be sketchnoting, or happens to be words, or whatever it is. And then you kind of feel like you're taking ownership of your own learning, and also that you'll progress much faster and you'll understand it much more. And then that's going to really help you then progress in a way that's going to feel like, yeah, I'm taking my own learning forward, and of course that's what we're all doing through the rest of our life once we sort of get out of the traditional sort of classroom, as it were.
Absolutely, you're so right. It's just like being able to give it as an option,
Yeah.
and giving back the power of drawing and doodling for sure. I do want to comment very quickly, because we had World Sketchnote Day.
Yep.
World Sketchnote Day is January 11th. And so I'm actually putting together a virtual event. It's going to be free. It's three
Brilliant.
hours. And
Let me
I
bring
even
that up
have
for me.
a Mike Rohde, who I mentioned, who created the term sketchnote. He's going to come and speak. And so it's very, very exciting. I literally yesterday just pushed publish on the registration page, and I checked it this afternoon, and we already had over 100 people registered. So it's
Oh,
very,
amazing.
very, very
Brilliant.
exciting. So I think, so this is interesting. It's where I'm going to teach a little sketchnoting 101. And then we have someone who's like an expert in lettering. We're going to do a little fireside chat, and then Mike's going to talk. Yeah, it's going to be very exciting if that interests
Fantastic.
people.
And
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I say that just shows you to have people signing up like that so quickly just makes a massive,
Yeah, yeah, it's very,
shows
yeah,
there's a real interest and need there, isn't there? So let's take us through
absolutely.
a few more of the different graphics then, and you can sort of chat
Yeah,
us through these
sure.
options. And
Yeah, yeah. This one was a presentation. So this is kind of like what, the thing is they all look different. Like, I shared with you, Mark, before the call a few hours ago, some of these examples, but they're really hard to choose which ones to share. Like literally these ones were very random that I shared with you, because I always tell people, I'm just as surprised as you are, because I don't know what people are going to say, right? I have no idea, right? So, you can, even if you weren't there, you can probably get a few things from this. And this was actually a presentation with a bunch of early childhood educators. So they were talking about, different things within, like, providing kindness to these
Mhm.
children, and what does that look like, and creating, yeah, like you can see there, like connection, clarity, control, and these four kind of ways to identify feelings and naming feelings, and all of that good stuff, right? So it's kind of beautiful when you can see some of these lessons, and they can kind of um, it's not just for this space.
Yeah.
It's love builds brains for everybody, not
Yeah,
just
for
in
sure.
early childhood.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, so this was a presentation. It was like an hour. So I can't remember exactly how long this one was, but usually they're around an hour or so. I think the shortest ones I usually do are like 20 minutes, but they're fast and furious for
Yeah,
sure when
yeah.
I do
And
20-minute ones. Yeah.
I'm fascinated because it looks so beautiful, and two, it fills the page so well, and it's so, like you say, you can, I mean, I wasn't there, but I can start to sort of see the event unfolding, as it were, from what I
Yes.
can see. So
Yeah.
from a practical sense, when you're doing it, do you
Mhm.
always start on the left hand side? Do you always need to leave enough space? Do you kind of have an idea of the amount of time that's going on and what you can do? Is that sort of part and parcel of being able to create these sorts of things?
Yeah, a lot of it comes with practice, and also, like, okay, if I know I have this much time, I can kind of try to balance with creating these ones digitally. Um, there's a lot of flexibility. You can move things around, you can make
Of
things
course.
bigger or smaller. Whereas before COVID in 2020, from 2013 to 2020, I was 100% on paper only, right? So you don't have the flexibility if you make a mistake to be able to move things around. And I actually really love the constraint that paper gives you, because you really have to be forced to put pen to paper and just like live with whatever happens.
Yeah.
But yeah, so you can kind of get a gauge. I'm like, oh, it's an hour. Like, you can, sometimes it's a little slower in the beginning, or you can make notes and then bring them in later. But it still has to be live, right? So you don't want to like wait too long and then get behind. Sometimes I'll cheat and like do a screenshot or take my phone out and take a picture of a slide. I'm not a superhuman.
Yeah, it kind of
These
gives you
are
that
the five
idea.
things, and then they go through the five things, like the headings, really quickly, and I'm like, I don't know if they're coming back or not, so let's
Yeah.
take a quick screenshot of this or
Yeah.
something. um,
Fantastic.
but yeah, and like the unsung hero of a lot of these too are like white space, right? It's the space in between things. Now, this one is a little bit more cluttered than the one we just saw, right? So, you know, I really leaned in on color to help segregate information, and like the circles are the different topics,
Hmm.
right? So you can kind of, even though it doesn't have a ton of white space, like I tried my best to make sure that the ideas like are really staying together within those different icons. um but yeah, sometimes it's not as easy to do that, but
Yeah.
yeah,
It
yeah.
was great that as you said that, because the one thing when I saw it to begin with was, I mean, what it cluttered wasn't what came to mind. It was full because, like you say, there's a lot less white space. But it was only as you started to articulate it, I thought, but I can still see the structure, like you say, and then it
Yeah.
becomes obvious. Like you say, you've got the circles, you've got the colouring. It is all there. But I sort of love the fact that that that's going to work in that way, and it's going to
Mhm.
come across. Like I say, it looks the same as the last one, and then you suddenly think, actually, no, it really doesn't. But you still got that kind of theme and that feel and that
Yeah.
same idea.
Yeah, and like, this one's a panel discussion, right? And I really love doing panels, but it's usually a lot of information, right? And
Yeah.
like your content is always going to be like king or queen, right? So I think when the people think sketchnoting, they go, "Oh, well now I have to draw everything." Right?
Mhm.
But like if you take it down to its essence, like there's a decent amount of drawing going on here, but the words still are very, very vital and very, very important. It's just a matter of like synthesizing that information and trying to like take it down to its core ideas and representing it in the words, and then what images or imagery can you like link together to highlight those ideas. But the information is always like, sometimes when people get started, I just encourage like them like 99% words, 1% drawing. And then maybe they do it for a few months. Okay, 95% words, 5% drawings,
Yeah.
right? Because the like when you see it all come together, it looks overwhelming. It's like, oh, I could never draw that. But I'm like, but if you take it down to its basic core elements, there's not a lot of actual drawing happening in these sketch notes, really. They're like, we've got, this one is illustrative with the circles, but they take the circles away and it's like mostly words, right?
Yeah.
So, and I'm not saying that to diminish the work. I try to show people that so that they're like not as scared to give it a try,
Yeah, I mean
right?
that makes a lot of sense to me because as a musician, and when I'm teaching drums, for example, you play something and people go, "Oh wow, that must be so complicated." But like you said,
Yeah,
actually, I'm just doing this, this, and this. And yes, there's some practice involved and whatever. But
yeah,
once you understand those complexes, those sort of complicated ideas in inverted commas, but you see them and how they work and how they might come together, then actually
yeah.
you think, "Oh yeah, I might not be able to do that immediately, but actually I can completely understand how." I would get there given, like I say, a little bit of support, a little bit of help, the odd lesson, or however that may well come.
Absolutely.
Great. So let's sort of take us through the next couple then, and we can sort of get an even sort of better idea of how they sort of how they sort of look depending on the different types of events.
Yeah, so this was when I did this was actually an interesting one because I did it digitally, but it was an in-person event. So I actually hooked in my laptop. I use a Surface, Microsoft Surface. We hooked it up, and then they projected it on this like gigantic screen in the room. So that was it was quite an interesting blend of the two, being able to be in person, but also have the flexibility of digital. It just means that when you make a spelling mistake, it's like 8 feet tall. And I even had someone say to me, they're like, I saw you starting to write a word and then you paused. You were looking up how to spell it, weren't you? And I was like, that's exactly what was happening.
Yeah,
That's
as we
exactly
all
what
do.
was happening.
Exactly.
Yeah. So this
Brilliant.
was also another panel discussion, and I kind of honestly, unless a client or somebody tells me um, a color palette, I kind of just make them up. So this one was kind of fun because it was like very blue, and because it was a local event, like they had a lot of, like ocean is a topic, right? And a lot of ocean foods and things like that. But this is actually a really interesting example because if you look on the left hand side, there's a lot of lines. And that's actually the first drawing skill that I teach people, is just drawing a line. Draw a straight line, draw a squiggly line, draw a wavy line. You could draw actually a pretty wicked sketch note with just words and lines, right? Because lines help connect, they help separate information, they help show direction and flow, which is kind of what this one is doing a lot of, right? It's showing it goes from here to here to here, then to here to here to here.
Hmm.
And it can highlight lines. You can use lines to highlight things,
Yeah.
right? So there's a lot of lines going on in this one. And I think that's kind of a nice thing to kind of point out, because at the end of the day, everything kind of like leans on a line, right? So like we also have some good containers here, which is just a line that's enclosed, right?
Yeah.
A circle, a square, a wavy, like the little shoe that's going up, and kind of in the middle, we've got little gray lines showing the evolve, like going up, little gray lines. And then we have this like weird blobby blue that the words are inside to kind of show, going upwards, right? But it's just a blobby line
Yeah.
enclosed,
But like
and
you
it's
say,
simplistic
yeah,
form,
yeah,
right?
exactly. But like I say, because of the
Yeah.
way it's there and how it looks and that kind of thing. And I guess the other thing which is probably important to kind of sort of recognize is the fact that, like I say, if you are branding something or you are working with a company, you can start off with a color palette, or you can kind of sort of have some kind of sort of predetermined ideas of how that's going to look in order to sort of, let's say, support the people you're working for.
Yeah. Yeah, I do a lot in cybersecurity. So this is kind of an interesting example of that. And I use the color palette based on the title was ransomware branding. It's so hot right now.
Mhm.
So it's like creating this little flame guy. So then, using that as a bit of a color palette. And this one has a lot of words. There's not a lot of drawings going on. And that's probably a nice example to show that, because obviously when I do some of these cybersecurity events, there's a lot of information happening.
Yeah,
It's pretty important. It's pretty important. So sometimes
yeah,
they end up being a little bit more wordy and less illustrative, like
yeah.
illustrations
Yeah,
rather. Yeah.
great, and that takes us all the way then back to kind of sort of where we started there
There
with
you
the
go. Full circle.
with the AI. Fantastic. It's fascinating, and I really love the way that I've sort of looked at it. I mean, I looked at it before we started, but I've seen so much more from just chatting to you as it's come through, and sort of seeing how that works. And I think taking that sort of fear factor away, because I think, like you said,
Mhm.
as you were explaining it, I mean, I would say I cannot draw. However, from
Mhm.
what you said, I now think that actually I could do this to help it work for me. And if it was
Yeah.
just for my notes, if it was just my way of understanding it, rather than just a whole load of random words that I'm writing on a page, because I've got
Yeah.
a structure, an idea, and a way of formulating it in my mind, which I guess then just develops, like say, as you practice and you get more used to doing it.
Yeah. It's really about reframing what drawing is at its core essence. And that's why I actually really love talking about doodling, because doodling is a very like non-threatening way of putting pen to paper, right? You do a doodle, you throw it away. You don't think about it in the same way that you think about drawing. It's like a lot of people say, "Oh yeah, I can doodle, but I can't draw." What's the difference?
Mhm.
It's how we look at it and how we perceive it. A doodle could be a drawing and a drawing could be a doodle, right? We give a lot of power to drawing as an art form. But we have to think about drawing as a good thinking tool, as a good communication tool, as a good learning tool, right? Kind of like knock it off its pedestal a little bit and be like, no, I can draw, because drawing is a way that I can do something, right? Put pen to paper to help myself learn and think and communicate, right? So, like when I was putting the book together, I thought a lot of people would want to learn how to sketch note to learn something, because that's one of my favorite things about it. But what I'm learning now in like my sketchnoting community that I have is a lot of people want to learn how to sketchnote to communicate complexity, right? So like there's so many different ways where we can start putting pen to paper and take it off that pedestal to help us learn to think, to communicate. And it's not about putting emphasis on trying to draw something pretty, that then it's like going to be shared around. It could even just be having a notepad by your computer or desk or table and make marks when you're trying to think out loud as like a way of thinking, right?
Yeah.
And thinking of, I'm saying thinking a lot. Does like, how many times did I say thinking in this call so far? 100 probably. So, but it's very important. It's very important. So, we have to kind of redefine what drawing is, and it does not have to be an art form or something that they do, right? Oh, I can't draw, right? Um, like I said, when I start teaching people how to do this, and like in my book, we start with a line and a square and put a line and a square and a circle together, and you got a little person. Like, it does not have to be, right? And I find like once you start to get some of that success and do your first ones, people are like, oh, this isn't as hard as I thought it
Yeah,
was.
yeah, absolutely.
Right? They're like, when you start piecing it together, like we were talking about, um, and I think a lot of people, they just like look at the finished product, right? And they think, oh, well, I could never do that. But that's just not the case, right?
Yeah.
It's like, but it's also not giving the aesthetics any power. Like sometimes I almost feel like I do when I do a lot of client work, I almost feel like I do the client disservice by making it too pretty, because then they won't want to do anything with it. They're like, no, 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 we have to hang it on the wall and not touch it. And I'm like, that's really nice and like good for my ego. And I'm glad you like how it looks. But it, like, sometimes it makes sense to mark on it or draw on it or show people that you're working on something, so not treating, like, I literally, when I'm in person, I give it, because it's usually very, very large on giant pieces of paper with markers, right? So I literally like give it to them all rolled up and I said, please throw this away. And they're like, what do you mean? And I'm like, in 3 years, when this is collecting dust in a corner, you have my permission to throw it away, right? This isn't precious. You're going to get a photograph next week. Don't worry about it.
Mhm. Yeah,
you
yeah.
know?
So
So yeah, I think we put too much emphasis on the product versus why I was there, which is a lot of the
yeah.
process.
So take us into your your day in life, your month in life, as it were. Like I say, you've been doing it for 10 years. So you sort of explained,
Yeah.
your clients will bring you in and you'll do it as part of a presentation and that kind of thing, whether that's in person or online. And then of
Mhm.
course you've got the book, and then like say you've got the sketchbook day. And then how do you then sort of work with people and sort of build that community, and where can people sort of find that? I know you've got your YouTube channel and social and all that kind of stuff. So sort of that sort of day in a month, shall we say?
Oh my gosh, it is fun because every day looks so different. Like some days I'm literally just sitting at the computer drawing like eight or 10 presentations and I can't move, and I'm like my brain is just fried by the end of it, doing client work. But I'm have a huge focus going into 2024 on my sketchnote school, it's called, like my online community. I'm making that priority number one for next year. So I'm still really loving doing the like live illustration pieces. But I really want to try to get this skill set in as many hands as possible, be able to support people. And I really love teaching and educating and bringing in other people who are really skilled at aspects of sketchnoting to work with people. So that's like a big focus of mine going into 2024. So fingers crossed it goes well.
Yeah.
I'm kind of I did start my community back in the spring, and so far so good. But we're doing some major changes going into World Sketchnote Day, which we're really excited about. So yeah, but yeah, every day is so different. It's like some months I'm like in person a lot, so I'm kind of traveling all over the place. And then some days are just like me by myself in my studio, just
Yeah.
banging out emails,
Yeah, we know
So
how that works.
it's
I,
very random. Yeah, it is. I was thinking about doing like an Instagram reel of like day in a life, but I'm like, I don't even know how to do this. Like, I don't even know. I don't even know where I would start because
yeah.
every day is so unique and different.
And in terms of the people in your community and the people that you're helping, is there kind of I don't want to say avatar because I know people talk about that all the time, but in terms of,
Yeah.
is it someone that you're sort of able to help be you so they can go and do stuff in presentations? Is it people that are just able to do it for themselves, for their own learning, their own understanding? Is there sort of a type of person that seems to be literally drawn into what it is that you're doing?
Yeah, the majority of the people that have been in the community and have stayed are more using it in their professional life, or they're using it as like some sort of self-development. They're
Mhm.
like, "Oh, I want to learn this skill so I can apply it in like lots of different ways." Or there's someone who like, "Oh, I attend a lot of business meetings and there's a lot of complexity and I want to be able to draw things out so I can try to explain stuff." Those shareholders, trying to be able to explain things in a simple way, so a lot of folks in the community that are um, kind of professionals but looking to kind of add it as a skill set to kind of help them in their work.
Yeah.
But we also have like school teachers in there looking on how they can teach and support their students. Some of them are kind of like, well, I'd like to learn this and I'll practice it and then I'll teach them. English as a second language teachers. And yeah, so it's kind of a bit of a mixed bag. And most of the people that have been sort of like, my early community members are people that have seen me at events,
Mhm.
right? So they're like, oh, I showed up at this cybersecurity event, I did the thing, and then they're like, oh, she has a book in a community, let's check it out. And you know what I mean? Because they
Yeah.
had that experience with me and they're like, oh, it would be so neat to learn that. And I think people, they enter into it with maybe a certain idea of why they want to learn it, but then they get to meet other people and how they're also applying it, to kind of like expand their idea of how they might be able to apply it in their work and life too. So it's pretty diverse, which I think is a really beautiful thing for
Yeah.
sure.
And
But
and
there's a lot of techie people just because I do so much tech events, so
yeah.
many. Like I do a lot in tech. So there's quite a high number currently of people in varying roles in ed tech and IT security. It's just like very, yeah, UX design and a whole bunch of very diverse spaces. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think if somebody, I think eventually there might be people that come into the community and they want to learn, and then maybe they'll like, oh, well, I want to be a professional sketchnoter. I think there could be a day that might happen. And there is one guy in my community that like, he totally could be, like, he's actually a caricature artist,
Right.
based in Kenya of all places. And he could totally do it. Like I'm coaching him a little bit about that. And I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, you could totally do it. But the community isn't necessarily for people who want to be professionals, but there's definitely some shining stars in there that I'm like, yeah, if this is something you want to pursue, you totally have the skills to do it.
Yeah,
So,
and I love that community aspect because I think with the greatest will in the world, we can set these things up in a way that we think is going to be helpful, and of course, we've got the skills that we want to share. But it's the things you learn from the people that are part of your community, what they learn from each other, how they build it up, how they give you direction and focus, because of course we're there to support people, and it's only by sort of hearing those things back and I can see how
absolutely.
one way you'd want to put the amount of time in it, but also how valuable it is as well. And the other thing that just struck me, if we just go back to this page, I was just thinking the amount of PowerPoint pages you'd have to do that, and I can understand this and see this so much more clearly than, like you say,
Yeah,
I can understand people who are doing those sorts of things, either wanting to put something before they have to share it, or
yeah.
certainly be able to articulate it in such a way that's going to help afterwards. You can just see that in such a different way for me in terms of my sort of understanding, I think, before we started chatting.
Yeah, I definitely feel like I could honestly create a whole new business just teaching people how to like present information.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Because I did 400 presentations this year. Like I drew 400 presentations and I did like 600 last year. Right. So that's like 1,000 in 2 years. Like that is a lot of drawing.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
You know
That's
what
a
you're
lot
doing.
of
Yeah.
listening and a lot of critical thinking about what people are saying. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, a lot of the presentations are they're tricky.
Yeah.
I'll just put it nicely. They're a little bit tricky, right? And I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, these could be so much better.
Yeah.
and I've experienced that sometimes the smartest people at that event are not the best speakers. So it allows you not to put people on pedestals, that's for sure. You're
Yeah,
like,
for sure. Yeah.
yeah. So it's been unique. It's been unique to be able to be in some interesting rooms with some people, and hear the presentations and things. But you know, uh, it's been really like joyful for me to be able to be on the other side as educating others to do this, because I think it is such a beautiful skill to learn to help you. And yeah, I know, like, I really have a place in my heart for beginners, right? Because I remember, like, it's kind of like also the bit of like the community I wish I would have had starting
Yeah,
out.
for sure. Yeah, yeah, it makes a lot of
I think
sense.
we all kind of do that a little bit. It's like, oh, I wish I would have had this. Like, what are things that I would have wanted?
Yeah.
Right. And I was very specific in my mind that I wanted to be a professional, but I think it would have been a really beautiful thing to have, just a community of space where people were also learning. So, like, one thing that we do in the community is once a month, we invite somebody who's like new-ish to sketchnoting. Like, maybe they've been doing it a long time, but they don't do a lot, or like they literally just started learning. And then people can see someone also on a very similar journey to them,
Yeah.
right? Like, we did our guest interview just a couple days ago, and the guy that was our interview person, he started digital but went to paper, which I thought was so fascinating, because most people do paper, then they go to digital.
Hmm.
But he really wanted to challenge himself, because digital is so flexible, that he was like, no, I need to challenge myself and like have the constraint of paper. And I just thought that was so fascinating. Like, I've never heard anyone do the opposite, who really wanted to challenge themselves, right? So, like, you just get to hear all these really interesting ways that people like to do it, and challenge themselves, or not, because like I'm kind of lazy. I'm not gonna lie.
I want to be able to change it. It's going to be fine. Yeah.
I'm kind of lazy. I'm like, I've used one drawing program and that's it. Like, I haven't tried any other ones, because I'm like, the learning curve of learning a new drawing program is so high that I'm like, no, I'm good.
Yeah, it's like, exactly, and I
You
think
know?
there are so many tools out there. I mean, I know this from streaming and podcasting and that kind of thing, and
Yeah,
it's that kind of, some are better than others in terms of different features or different points where they kind of make a difference. But actually, if it does what you want it to do and it gives you the flexibility you want, and normally
yeah,
it is, I mean, certainly Ecamm is something that I use for this, and it's the community, it's the group of people, it's the people I've actually been and spent time with. That's the reason that not only is it a
right,
fantastic program and it sort of helps me do what I need to do, but there's, like I say, it's the people around it and all that kind of thing which really helps.
right.
So thank you so much for chatting. Please do, if people want to find out more, get involved in that kind of thing, where's the best place to send people?
Yeah, well, I need to have multiple ways to make things extra complicated. So I have Mind's Eye Creative is sort of been like my business for 10 years that I've sort of worked under. So that's like all things very like professional, all my conference work and my meetings and things. But last year, when I launched and published the book in the community, all things learning how to sketchnote is under sketchnote.school. So I've got my book, my community, and then I literally today went, oh yeah, this should be, like, I had a page, but it wasn't findable. I was like, that should be findable, because we were just posting about it on socials and stuff. So you can find everything about World Sketchnote Day and registering for that free event, which is very, very exciting. Yeah, for
Amazing.
sure.
And
Yeah,
we've got links to a lot of that stuff that you just mentioned all in the description as well, so people can kind of go through and click through and find all those things too. So yeah,
I appreciate
absolutely
that.
amazing. So
Woo, look at this. Look at that. We
thank
did it.
you. Thank you
And the
so much.
internet stayed and everything was, I
It's
still am
okay.
in the dark, but it's,
Our lives work
we
beautifully
did it. We did it.
is kind of the thing. So
No
yeah,
kids interrupted me. Amazing.
yeah. Thank you so much indeed, and I really do appreciate your time. And it's been fascinating for me. And I really hope people check out more about it, and yeah, in your community and your sketchbook day is really really successful. So yeah, keep in touch, and we'll speak again very soon.
Sounds great. Thanks so much for having me.
So, of course, one of the things that we like to do is to share an old podcast as well. And I thought this one might be sort of in keeping with what we're talking about here, sort of mindfulness art activities. And Cynthia chatted us through the way she got involved in this sort of thing and how it helps her as well. So that was episode 260. And as always, if you go to educationonfire.com, even if you can't remember this particular, if you remember 260, you can put it up in the search bar there, and then it'll pop up and find it. And of course, it's on all the platforms as well. So yeah, and as always, there's links straight through to the websites and socials and all that kind of thing as well. So do make the most of all of this information and all this content. It's there for you, and to be as supportive as possible. And that's one of the reasons I love doing the live show, a chance to share new things, but also some old things as well. So thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking some time of your evening if you're here in the UK, and afternoon or morning if you're maybe further afield. We'll be back again. I'll be back again next week. We don't have a guest next week. I thought I'd do a little bit something rounding up of the year and have a kind of a sort of a Christmas theme and a few little things that we can do just for a short time to kind of really enjoy ourselves. So thank you for everything that you've been doing so far. Thank you for all the work that you're doing within education and supporting children. Do keep in contact. As you know, educationonfire.com gets you to me and everything that we're doing over there. And we'll be back again and chatting again next week. Education is not the filling of a pail, but the lighting of a fire.